Hi, hello, I'm Rasheed Ogunlaru, coach, speaker, and author, and welcome to this, the latest in my Soul Leader Inspiring Interviews. And today I'm actually genuinely very, very excited about today's interview. I'm here with somebody who is a leader and somebody I'd call a friend, also a good contact and colleague. And I'm very lucky to catch him at the moment because he works internationally, and it just so happens he's here in the UK at the moment. Francis Kaikumba, delight and welcome to you to the Soul Leader interviews. I'm just going to say a very, very brief bit about you, but then I would love to hear a bit about directly from yourself. But you've had a number of leadership roles. I think when we first met, you were the chief executive for an organization called the African Health Professionals, I think, and Network. Hope I've got that right. You'll soon correct me. You have you've run your own consultancy. You have been chief field officer at UNICEF in Sierra Leone. You've done a number of different leadership roles. So I'm delighted here that you're here for the Soul Leader interview series. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you. And just to say thank you so much for having me on here. Um, it was when I was at African Health Policy Network
Oh, yes, that's right. That's right.
over a decade ago that we first met. And I think I saw you. It was actually I met you. You were delivering a workshop, and I was walking in between. I was walking from one workshop to another, and I heard you speaking, and it was like it was magnetic because you were saying exactly what I wanted to hear at that time about having to, if you've got a problem, having to have the right the right tools, the right team, and be careful of the task. I think you drew
Mm.
three circles, and you
Mm.
said that the intersection between those three circles is where you need to be focused at. And I can still remember that till this day. You
Wow.
know, I can clearly remember that to this day. Um, and like I said, you know, it was like it those conversations all those 10 years ago. You helped me most importantly to find my voice. You know, so I really appreciate this. So thank you.
Oh wow, thank you very much. Well, that's
Thank
that's
you.
amazing to hear. And it's funny. So funny enough, that intersecting circle things is there and present in the Soul Leader course. So I'm glad that there's a beautiful consistency there. So
Yeah.
Francis, it'll be really, in these interviews, I handpick people who I've been lucky enough to meet along my journey who are leaders of different types.
Yeah.
At different levels in organizations. I've interviewed
Mm-hmm.
chief executives, I've interviewed people at various different levels of leadership, senior management, people, middle management, people starting, people growing, people at different stages in their leadership journey. Um, but each one I consider to be somebody who's quite heart-centered, who is, to
Mm-hmm.
my mind, a soul leader or has elements of that, whether they would describe themselves as such. Um, does that being described as a heart-centered and authentic leader, does that chime with you? Is it something that is important to you and perhaps has always been important to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that first up.
Well, for me, you know, I don't think I've never seen myself. I never really saw myself as a leader, to be absolutely honest with you. For me, I've always seen myself as someone who cares about people and wants to help people. And I think through helping people and through holding people's hand and helping them through difficult times, that's made me a leader. You know, I fell into leadership by accident, kind of thing. I remember it was probably back in, God, this was around 2009, 2010, when I was at Hackney Council, where my manager at the time said, you know that you could be a leader one, you know that you could run your organization. And that was like the first time anybody had actually ever said that to me. You know, coming
Mm,
from a minority background in the UK, um, you know, we don't have those models, those role models, and don't have those opportunities to really see ourselves in those positions. And so that was the first time somebody had actually said that to me. I was just about 26, 27 at the time. And it just sparked off a fire inside me to say, actually, do you know what? I do want to be a leader.
mm,
And I didn't know at the time why. I didn't really know why I wanted to. It's probably because someone said I could do it, and I thought I'd probably, you know, in mercenary, I was thinking, oh, I'll get more money, but I didn't really know what it was about, but I just said, yeah, I'll do it.
Mm,
And so, yeah, I came into this leadership journey by accident, kind of. It
mm.
wasn't really by design.
Isn't it extraordinary that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something very powerful in that story. Isn't it remarkable, Francis, how very often I think a key element of leadership is when somebody else very often sees something in us and they
Mm-hmm.
nurture that. I mean, it
Yeah.
sounds as though that there was something very powerful about that leader. So tell us a little bit about, can you tell us, just give us a little bit of a quick paint a portrait of your
Mm-hmm.
growing up. You said a little bit about growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Just tell us a little bit about yourself and your
Yeah.
and your background and what led you then there to that Hackney Council, that moment when somebody said, "Well, you could be a leader." Just give us a quick intro.
Yeah, I think the thing is, I think probably if I look back now, I've had the hindsight of time, and I can look back at my time. I can see why people could see that, and I couldn't probably see that in myself because I came to the UK at age 3. We I was born in Sierra Leone, in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and my mum came here to complete her studies. She came to do a PhD at Sussex University. I mean, at Surrey University. And so I grew up in Guildford, which was a very, at that time, Guildford in the 80s was a very predominantly white area. And so me and my sister were probably like the only two black dots in the school picture. We had and so when I was young, I was always different. And I learned from a young age to not to embrace my diversity, embrace my difference, um, and and turn my difference to kind of to an advantage, to
Mm,
use that to you know I mean lead in a way.
mm,
So I guess when I was young, because I was quite at the time I was quite physically quite big as strong as well. I
mm,
think at the time people initially were a bit feared me, but
mm,
then they, I always had a group, a supportive group of friends around me at school.
mm,
Um, and so, yeah, and also I think also if you look at my childhood, I went through, went to a number of schools. I think I
mm,
went to about 5 or 6 schools, different schools. And so being having that sort of challenge of meeting new friends and
mm,
adjusting to different to change and to different circumstances, etc. At a young age, it gave me, I think, skills that I draw on till today in
mm,
terms of you know building relationships and dealing with change and adjusting to
mm.
different circumstances. I
It's
think
really interesting.
it became natural for me.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So from that change from very early on,
Mm-hmm.
and arriving somewhere new at 3 and so on, going to school, being in lots of different environments, very early on, that ability to
Mm-hmm.
build relationships, adjust to change, and so on. Can I just ask, in those early years and in the
Mm-hmm.
school years, I know there wasn't that moment until much later at Hackney Council, that thing about
Yeah.
leader,
Yeah.
but were you the kind of person that looked at, you talked at some points, you were bigger and stronger at some points and what have you, but were you in any ways a leader amongst your friends groups, or were you the person who put yourself forward to do things? Were there any of those elements to your personality or to your journey?
Yeah, I think it was more. I learned again. I think I grew up. I mean, I don't want to paint a very rosy picture. I have to give you the warts and all, and be honest. It wasn't at times the best. We dealt with a lot of racism, and I think one of the knee jerk reactions, and a kind of defense mechanism I got was to learn to control my narrative. So before you say something about me, I will say something about me. So in class, amongst my friends, etc., I was the kind of the louder one who would put the hands up and have an opinion to say. And I think it was more out of nervousness and insecurity, if I really would, to be honest, at the time. Because before you could judge me, I would want to sort of control that narrative and
And
get
that's
the
a powerful leadership lesson. Is
my
I
voice.
think, for me, we've talked a lot about brand and so on.
Yeah.
That ability to control one's own narrative is
Mm-hmm.
just so important for so many reasons. And,
Mm-hmm.
to control your narrative generally, to control your own narrative as a human being, as a leader of color, and someone is really, really important. So you learned that lesson early on. What did you know what you wanted to do back then? What was your aspiration back then?
You see, I think, this is why it's really interesting talking to you, and I can talk to you about this, because I think if you look at my life back then, till the moment I met you and we started conversating, I was living in this country almost like an alien. Like I wasn't, we were, at the time, I think the terminology was illegal aliens and stuff like that. We were, but I came over to the UK at a young age, and I was different, and people would come and touch my hair and touch my skin and stuff like that. But like I said, I learned to navigate and to create a space for myself within my social network and in society, that I felt that I could be in control. Where it wouldn't. My biggest fear has been allowing others, not being in control, and allowing others to take advantage, to oppress and to suppress me. You remember at times teachers would, I remember the things that teachers said to me that, oh, you'll only become a bus driver, or why don't you, I mean, I said to a teacher once, they asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I wanted to be president of Sierra Leone when I was about 12 years old, which was a bit, ridiculous. And she said, oh, let's be a bit realistic. You could probably be a bus driver or something like that. And I remember getting so annoyed by that at a young age. And so, yeah, I think.
Well, that's it. Well, I want to pause you there because it's ironic. If that person then would know that if they fast forward to a time not so long ago where you've worked in the office of and liaised with and worked on product with am I right? The president of Sierra Leone.
Yeah.
So, I mean, was there a moment of irony in that?
This is one of the things I look back at. I look back at my life, and just saying that now has made me realize how far I've gone in many ways. And I think for me, let me not. I'm not going to try and. I wasn't destined. None of this was. A lot of this wasn't planned. But it was part of a concerted belief that I was fighting against something. I didn't necessarily know what I was fighting against, but I just didn't want to accept being pigeonholed by society. And I think that drive is what got me to, I think looking back at that, so I mean, because academically I wasn't fantastic. I wouldn't say I was like top of the class or anything like that. A lot of my friends will probably say that about me, but one of the things I just didn't do is I didn't just give up and accept people's expectations of me.
And is there something, I just wanted to dive in and ask, because I wonder, Francis, was there something about, you talked a while ago about helping people. Was there something, I get the feeling with you that justice, fairness, equity, these kind of things, and is very important. And in fact, I know that they're important. When did they emerge? So, of course, I get the sense that there's the survival instinct and wanting to control your own narrative, and for all sorts of reasons. But where did that element of other people and their well-being, or where did that bit emerge?
I think it's a very good question, and I wouldn't have known this probably up until this year, but I've learned actually was from the first time I went back to Africa, if I really looked at it, because prior to that, when I was from the age of 3 till 13, when I went back to Africa, I was living in this, like I said, as an alien in a foreign land, But what I did for the first time, what hit me when I went back to Africa was realize actually I was privileged. As much as I thought I was going through hell and it was horrible, it was difficult for me living in Guildford and being a black person, getting called the N-word every day, etc., and getting pointed at on the streets, etc. I realized that those problems that I was dealing with paled in insignificance to the challenges that I saw many young people my age were facing in Africa. And living, having that dual perspective, living in those two different worlds,
Mm.
you know, like a split screen between UK and then, you know,
Mm.
Africa, I realized there's something fundamentally wrong going on. You know, I see half of my family, half of my identity living in you know, absolutely difficult, challenging, you know, appalling circumstances, you know, things that, and it's just not right.
Mm. And just to
And then
set the
also,
context, I mean, I wonder if, just
yeah,
diving in there and from some things that
mm-hmm,
we've talked about and that you've
yeah,
shared, that
mm-hmm,
I guess going back to, and I'm intrigued about going back to that, to Sierra Leone,
yeah,
at 13, and whether it was a holiday or for a period of time or what have you. But it's
yeah,
interesting, isn't it? Because I think from conversations with you, Sierra Leone, the
mm-hmm,
irony for all of the challenges it has is one of the most, certainly, am I right, minerally rich and in terms of resource rich places. So can you just paint could you just paint a very, very quick picture for somebody who's
yeah,
listening to this who perhaps isn't
yeah.
new to that?
You know, Sierra Leone is it's a small country, you know, in on the west coast of Africa, with a population of about 7 million. But you know, like I said, when I went back to Africa, you know, I did notice the poverty, but surrounded by jaw-droppingly beautiful environment. It was like a paradise, you know, in terms of the beaches we've got, you know, in terms of the wildlife, in terms of, you know, the natural resources, the mineral resources, you know, abundance, absolute abundance of natural, you know, natural beauty. And so it was a weird, you know, there's parts of that I saw wealth as well, wealth that I've never seen in the UK.
Mm.
You know, at that young age, I remember we went to a dinner at the then president's house, and he had a wall full of gold blocks. You know, gold, actual gold bullion blocks. You know, I saw wealth.
That's
I
one
saw.
class.
Yeah. He was
And this is
extremely
at
rich.
13 you experienced this.
I experienced that. I
Wow.
saw how the elite, because at that time, my mum had grown in to be part of the elite. My mum has become a very influential and notorious person in Sierra Leone. She's done, you know, lots for women and getting women into politics. But
Mm.
at that time, I got a glimpse of that, of the two worlds within Africa as well.
Wow.
The world that we see on TV, but then this other world of,
Mm.
you know, opulence, wealth, extravagance, etc. So I could see the inequality in
Mm.
that country, but I could also see the absolute potential, and the wealth, the richness that was there, you know,
Mm.
in terms of diamonds, gold, etc. We've got one of the, you know, as probably people already know about Sierra Leone, it's known for its huge diamond assets and gold assets. But also, I think what I also learned, which was important, was the human capital. You know, we've got a very young population, a population um, that are very talented, you know, and have not been given the opportunities in the world. So again, yeah, you know, I come back to that feeling of,
Mm.
yes, things need to, something needs to be done here. We need to
And,
fix this world somehow.
and was that sense
Mm-hmm.
very apparent then at 13? Was that sense quite evident to you at 13? Because, I mean, it's interesting, Francis, because already,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are so many things here that I'm keen to then pick up from with
Mm-hmm.
you. There's one of the things that I think is magical from what you've already said is that there's your journey, and then there's so often our journey isn't isolated. So it sounds as though
Mm-hmm.
your mother's journey is then being remarkable, coming to the UK
Yeah.
for a betterment, and then achieving all sorts of things and helping women to pull. Can you just paint a little bit of a family picture? Because often to
Of
understand
course.
many of us, isn't it? We
Yeah.
need to understand and that leadership thing. And there
Yeah.
she is as leader. So could you just paint
Yeah.
a little bit of picture of her, of the family growing up? Just tell us a little bit more.
Well, the thing is, that's why, I've had probably the best leader, mentor, teacher that I could have ever had in my mum. She grew up in abject poverty in Sierra Leone, in the East End of Sierra Leone, which is the like East End of London kind of thing. It's notoriously known for the more harsher. She used to work in a market when she was young. She struggled to pay for her own school fees, etc. She was the only girl that was educated in her family, etc. But she moved from there to becoming, you know, to be celebrated by the BBC as the BBC 100 Women. She was, she has an illustrious career. Work she's run an organization for over 20 years called 50/50 that has helped to get more women into politics. They've actually achieved that in the last elections. Now we've got 30% of women represented in politics in Sierra Leone, and that was their calling mission. She'd worked for the DFID, for Department for International Development for the UK, and worked at very senior levels across Africa. She's got a PhD. But I've seen her journey from when we were in the UK, when she was actually cleaning in the toilets of my school when we first moved to the UK, struggling to, hold down jobs and to finish her PhD, to, achieving all that she's achieved in her life. So that subplot, that backdrop, has been something that's always been a source of inspiration and motivation. As much as I complained and thought my situation was difficult, the trailblazing that my mum did for us, in coming over here, is absolutely remarkable. And I think a lot of people in the diaspora, a lot of people, refugee families, etc., they forget and they don't appreciate the mountains that have been shifted by our parents, the opportunities that have been created for us. My mom's, everything I am today it is nothing compared to the social mobility and the soft landing that my mom's created for me. So
very, 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 very profound, very profound, and it's so important, isn't it, when it comes to leadership? Those people and those the family members, the mums, very often, very often being so significant. I'm curious then, how did you find your own path? Because how did you find your own path and your own career? What you've talked before, you pointed that you found yourself at one point, you're in Hackney Council. This is a thing when the leadership bit emerged, but how did you find your own path? Just very briefly, what did you do when you left school and so on? What did you want to do?
Well, for me, again, I didn't really have a clear, I think like most young people nowadays, you don't have a clear guidance or clear career path to follow. I kind of modeled my way through. I knew I wanted to work with people. I knew I wanted to support people. So that drew me towards doing my first degree in social science. I also knew that I wanted to do something that was going to challenge some of the poverty and inequality that I was facing. So that's why I did my master's in poverty, conflict, and reconstruction at Manchester. But then after university, I realized I applied for something which was very, I think it was very important for my career at the time, because I realized that as much as we could make all these changes at the macro level and at the national level, things always boils down to what happens locally. You see change is really manifested at a local level. So with your neighbors, with your family, and so I joined a thing at the time called the National Graduate Development Program for Local Government, NGDP, which was like a fast track scheme, leadership scheme for the future for leaders in local government. So that.
How old were you at the time?
I was about 23 at the time. And that got me working in Hackney Council and so on and so forth. And I think, to be honest with you, even though it was a leadership program, I think my ambitions, I don't think I was very clear at the time what I wanted to achieve. I thought I just wanted to I think it was just I wanted something that was pay me well. I wanted
Mm,
financial security. When you just come out of university, I think that's the first thing you think about is I need something that's going to pay me well, and I can build from that.
mm. But then here you
Um,
are. But then here you are. You find yourself on this program.
yeah,
You then later, when you fast forward, there's somebody, a manager who sees in you, you could be a
yeah,
leader, you could lead this
yeah,
organization.
yeah,
If we, and we might need to do a
yeah,
little bit of time jumping around, but
yeah,
if we do fast forward a little bit to the
yeah,
time when you were at the African Health Policy Network, I understand the first
yeah,
time you're a director now. This, I think it's a
yeah,
relatively small kind of charity, and so
yeah, yeah.
how did then that gap between this person saying, okay, you could be a leader, and then that happen? What can you just tell us very briefly what
Okay.
happened in between?
Yeah, for me, I took a it was a complete leap of faith. I was 31 at the time. I had not really had that much experience of management. I knew that I needed to learn how to manage. I've seen managers around me, some good, some terrible,
Mm,
and I could see at the times where at the time I felt like I could do a better job at sometimes with some of the managers I saw, and also I felt that I needed to learn. I thought it was a skill that I needed to learn because in jobs up until then, when the new person came into the team, etc., I'd be the first person to go over and say, "Hello, how are you? Do you know this is how you do things? This is who you need to." I always had that kind of innate knee-jerk reaction to try and help
mm,
people out.
mm,
And so seeing this job for me, it was just it was a dream. It was a dream. It was for me, it married up all the things that I thought I wanted to do at the time. I wanted to one give back to the continent that I came from. It was an
mhm,
opportunity for me to work with Africans and for Africa as a whole in its broader sense, but also to work on an issue, a clear issue that Africans that affects Africans in the UK disproportionately. Because at the time, that organization was actually called African HIV Policy Network,
mm,
and it was going through a transition from being focusing on HIV to
mm,
a broader focus on health. Um, and I really felt that I was drawn by the mission. I was
mm,
drawn by the fact that it was helping Africans who were in the UK who had to live with the stigma and the isolation of living with a health condition like HIV, as well as dealing with the inequality,
mm,
the poverty, the exclusion of being African in the UK
mm,
that
mm,
comes with that. So, like I said, it was a dream opportunity. I didn't think I'd get it. I applied for it, and when I got through to the interview, it's like someone took. I just felt like it was like an out of body experience because all those years leading up to then, all the injustice, all the fire that was lit in my belly just
mm,
started to explode at that interview, and I just
mm,
spoke with true passion about no, want to do something to stop what was going on, and then this was the first that was the first kind of platform for me to actually express myself and
mm,
express that desire and that passion um, that I never had before. So that opportunity really gave me a chance to cut my teeth and to grow as a
mm,
leader, as an individual. But it wasn't easy.
mm. Because
And
I'd imagine that
yeah,
you've got so many different things, isn't it? You've got staff,
yeah,
you've got a team, you've got
mm-hmm,
many multiple stakeholders,
mm-hmm,
you've got all sorts of very big issues to
yeah,
address. There's policy issues. You
mm-hmm,
need to kind of influence from politicians, all sorts of different people, all sorts of different stakeholders, and to try and be making an impact for the public. How did you, really just very brief, what did you learn from that tenure, that first time being a leader where people look up to you internally and externally?
but like I said, this is where it comes to you, because I was modeling through a lot of that role until we started talking, because you made me realize that I needed to work on myself. Because prior to meeting you, all I was focusing on at the time was understanding the policy issues, understanding the advocacy issues, networking, thinking very externally, looking at that job from an external lens, and who do I need to be talking to, where do I need to be going, what do I need to be on, not necessarily thinking about me as a brand, who am I and what am I bringing to the table. And so that's what I learned, initially, that if I'm going to work in this job, if this job's going to work for me, I need to be assured of who I am. I need to be confident in who I am. I need to express that confidence and inspire people with that, not necessarily be so preoccupied about, others and pleasing other people, but actually focusing more about building up my own capabilities and my own brand. And so that was the first lesson I learned in leadership, which I needed to, at that time, I needed to learn that actually, if you are going to find your voice, if you are going to be authentic and be your unique self, it starts from a rigorous internal study. It starts from really looking within and building from within. And that's one of the things I got from your book, and I got from the conversations we had.
Well, thank you very much. That's very powerful to hear. I'm kind of touched by that. I want to then jump forward a little bit to, I guess, the gap between us having conversations. So you did that role. And for people then who perhaps look you up, find you on, look at your LinkedIn profile, what have you, there's then been a number of roles that you've done internationally, and you've gone on to do huge tasks, huge roles, challenging roles. Could you just tell us some of the different roles that you've done internationally? Because I want to then pick up on, in some of our remaining time, some of the challenges which I guess will be very relevant for many people here. You may have your first leadership job, or you might have for some people, first CEO job, and that's great. There's that lovely link there, people who look like us and seeing that actually you can be a CEO. But then, Francis, you've taken on a number of hugely challenging projects, pieces of work, and so on, that required a lot of leadership internationally. Can you just tell us a little bit about some of those different roles, those different things that you've done? I think people will be fascinated to just learn a little bit more about some things you've done.
Since then, I've been on a 10-year plus journey across Africa, all in leadership positions. Following HPN, I was appointed CEO of the College of Surgeons for East, Central, and Southern Africa, which is the largest surgical training institution in sub-Saharan Africa, based in Arusha in Tanzania, working from the East and Central and Southern Africa health community. It was training surgeons and health officers in 14 different countries in that region. Wow. Which was a fantastic opportunity. It opened the door for me to Africa. It made me learn a lot about the lived experience and the challenges that many communities and many countries face in Africa. I then moved from that to working in Sierra Leone. Around 2014, there was the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone. We lost over 5,000 lives too, and that was crippling the health sector and the health services in that country. And I had the unique and absolutely invaluable opportunity to go back to Sierra Leone to work as country director for King's College's King's Sierra Leone Partnership, which is a partnership between the King's Health Partners, which is a an amalgamation of teaching hospitals and the King's College University in London. They'd struck up a partnership with the main referral hospital in Sierra Leone, which is Connaught Hospital, which is the main teaching and training hospital for medical staff across Sierra Leone. I joined that organization at a very difficult and challenging time. This was in the middle of the Ebola outbreak. They had seen the largest number of Ebola patients anywhere in the world at the time. They'd seen over 1,000 patients had gone through there. I was working with a staff of mainly UK-based clinicians who were either volunteering or working in paid positions out there to support the reconstruction of the health systems and services in that hospital, but across the country as a whole. With also doing research and action learning into identifying mechanisms to strengthen the health systems, being a core kind of focus of that role. It was very challenging, but very exciting and inspirational.
What was your role there technically? You were what was the title that was attributed?
I was the country director. So I was leading the team. I was the kind of interface between the Kings and the government of Sierra Leone, the Ministry of Health. I was working very closely with the Ministry of Health at the time. We actually helped to draw up the teaching hospitals complex act, which basically moved Sierra Leone hospitals towards more like the NHS, where it's a kind of semi-autonomous body. Prior to that, the hospitals in Sierra Leone were just largely, weren't just largely, they were just government-controlled entities. And it creates, it came with its problems in terms of they were very politicized, and they could be very, it was very hard, very bureaucratic.
So it's hugely complex, isn't it? So here you are,
yes,
playing a leadership role,
yeah,
at a time where there is a huge health pandemic,
yes,
with multiple different partners. But that you've now got far more staff. Can you give us a sense of scale? How many people were you responsible for in terms of your staff, and some of that, just to give us people a bit of a picture of the different moving parts?
Yeah, I had about 35 direct staff that I was leading in the hospital, who are UK-based clinicians. But those clinicians worked within teams, and they were leading teams of local staff as well. So in the hospital as a whole, we're looking at around about 300 staff. It's the largest hospital. I think it's 200 bed. I don't want to quote the numbers and get it wrong. Yeah. But it's a large facility. But it was like a microcosm of the broader health system. It was a great, because all of the challenges that you saw in Connaught Hospital, they kind of replicated. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, we're going to put. I'm going to pause.
Yeah.
We're going to pause you there. So if you just hold there, folks, we're going to pause there. Thanks so much, Francis. We just paused there, and and in fact, it was a good moment for a pause, because I just want to just kind of pause myself and kind of take stock. So, you've had your first leadership role, and then you talked about then a number of international roles. First of all, this College of Surgeons roles working across 14 different countries. Then this Chief Field Officer country
director
role in Sierra Leone at the lead hospital during the Ebola outbreak. What can I just ask? What's the learning at this particular point? Because I imagine here there's a huge amount of responsibility.
Yeah. Again, it was about it was the responsibility, but also not feeling out of my depth, to be honest with you. I remember both jobs, if I look back at them, I was struggling internally. Whilst I was taking on these very challenging roles, I was like a duck that was trying my best not to let the world see that I was really struggling underneath, because I was dealing with, when you're working with surgeons, you're dealing with highly strong individuals, are
Mm,
very, very intelligent, who
mm,
at the time, I mean, one of my boss was the clinician, the chief medical officer for Zimbabwe. He was Mugabe's, physician, and all the bosses that I worked with at the time at the College of Surgeons, they were all the leading uh,
mm,
clinicians in their country. They're either chief medical officers or the clinician of the president. So,
mm,
they're very senior, huge expectations. And me coming from a non-clinical background,
mm.
it initially kind of, they looked down at me, and so I had to prove myself in those positions. I had to spend a lot of time to show what was I bringing to the table.
And this will
And,
resonate with so many people, Francis. I mean,
mm-hmm,
I can imagine many people are watching this thinking, actually, whilst I may not have done X or Y that Francis had done, what you mentioned here really resonates. You've got all
yeah,
of these characters, all these personalities. You've got your own staff, sure, but then you've got
yeah,
all these stakeholders and senior stakeholders and people with strong personalities, the politics, there's high stakes, and so on. What 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 would be your advice to somebody who's watching this, who's also, and that thing that you said about those moments of feeling out of one's depth, and I bet lots of leaders of that, can I
yeah,
do this? Can I take this role? What
yeah.
would be your advice at that moment? Somebody's watching this and feeling, that's how I'm feeling right now. I've got all of these strong characters. I'm feeling a bit out of my depth in this role. Any pointers of advice that you want to share?
Yeah, you have to realize that there are going to be things that are, one of the things I did realize quickly, there are things that were beyond my scope and beyond my control, like that were above me, in terms of I would never understand surgical training and how to train a junior doctor into be a surgeon. I wouldn't know any of the technical aspects of that role. But it
Mm,
was about finding your niche, find what value you're bringing to the table, find what you're, and what I did find there was I knew something about a thing called strategy and
mm,
planning and organizing, which when I started to talk about strategies, SWOT analysis, business plans, um, organizational strategy, 5-year plan, or those very highly strung, individuals are listening to me and are like, oh,
mm,
what is this thing? Because they came from a different planet where they didn't really understand about marketing, branding, merchandising. How do we sell the college? How do we grow the numbers, etc.? How do we automate some of our training systems? All of that stuff. So I brought to that job a whole new dimension, and and I found my own value
mm,
within that organization.
mm,
I created value for
mm.
myself. And that's the thing, that's what I'd say to a junior person: find your niche, find your specialism. I think at the time I was reading David Beckham's biography, and he said he was never a great football player, but one thing he did learn
He
was
said he
to,
wasn't a great footballer player. That's interesting, isn't it?
yeah, he said that about
People would
himself. He said
disagree.
he knew that he was playing with players who were much better than him. But what he learned to do was to take free kicks over and over again. He learned that if I was the only one on the team that could take free kicks and corners, then I'll always be in the team.
Oh,
And that's what I use, that mentality. I said, okay, what do I know that these are
mm,
people around me don't know that
mm,
could be my specialism?
mm.
Again, going back to surgical training, it's all about specialisms and being, And so I thought, what's my niche? What's my specialism in the college? And that was, again, branding, marketing, and we helped to grow the college's numbers and grow the brand and get longer term funding for the college
Right.
and have a strategy. And I can see till this play, that's why it's now the largest surgical training, college
Wow.
in Africa. And the
Really
same thing.
powerful piece of advice. Just to pause at that
Mhm.
point, I think that's
Yeah,
really powerful, isn't it? Knowing
yeah,
what your value is, knowing what you bring to the table,
mhm,
and it must be quite something seeing those kind of results. I
mhm,
wanted to ask you at that moment, feel free to go back to your point you're going to make, but I wanted to ask
mhm,
a little bit about what are when you pause, because I think you said that, often
mhm,
it's quite nice to have this opportunity to pause. When you do pause,
mhm.
what are the things in your career that you're most proud of? And maybe it's worth me just putting on the table, after that, you work for UNICEF, one of those kind of
Yeah,
a huge international body that plays a key kind of role. That what are the things that you're most proud about in your journey, and will you tell us a little bit about what that international development, what that part of the journey is about?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my childhood. I think, never losing sight of um, the impacts that you're making. Not never being, you can get in these leadership jobs. You can get like swept away with all the big the strategies, the documents, the buzzwords, the terminologies, the meetings, the conferences, all of that. But realizing that none of that really matters if it's not actually making a difference in people's lives.
Mm.
And so I think one thing that I've learned and I've always been conscious of in my roles is to really be clear about what value are we creating, what difference is this making, how are we learning from this, how are we growing as an institution, as individuals, and how are we impacting, how are we changing the world, how are we in our own way. So I think because the development world is going through a kind of transition at the moment where I think people are starting to, there's been lots of questions about its efficiency and its effectiveness, and how is this a good use, does development work, etc. There have been lots of questions about it. And I still think it has a very extremely valuable role to play, but it needs to really go back to really thinking about the people that it serves. We're here to serve those countries. We're here to make a difference in those people's lives. We're not there to grow our organizations and just be so focused on, us as individuals who are working in the sector, but it's about really creating that value in the lives of the lives of the communities that we serve. So I think that's one of the things I've learned about the development journey. I think the organizations like UNICEF, who are very connected to local and community-led systems and structures, and that are helping people at that grassroots level, they're the ones that are making that longer-term transition and change. I think some of these organizations they can get so swept up in their own agenda, and they forget about really making a tangible difference.
Really powerful. I mean, in our remaining few minutes, I wanted to ask a little bit about, and I think this lovely link back to it. Tell us a little bit about your approach to developing people in teams, because now as we fast forward all those years, it's now from your first leadership job, where it was all new. You were sharing with me the other day a little bit about developing teams and really, really empowering people. And I think that, Francis, developing teams can be hugely challenging. You talked before about, and we all know, isn't it? Organizations, good managers, bad managers, it can be often really difficult developing a good team. Could you tell us your approach to leadership and team and how you've developed teams and how you've empowered them? Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. One of the things I've learned in my journey has been the value that leadership isn't an individual. It isn't an individual journey. It isn't. You're not. If everything was focused on that one individual, those systems will fail. You need to create high performance, a culture of leadership. You need to create a culture of leadership of high performance amongst your staff. And we're working. One of the things I learned, because I'm working in Africa, where Africa's facing a huge youth bulge, a youth quake, where there's more young people on the planet coming from Africa. They say 1 in 10, under 35-year-old is coming from Africa at the moment. There's more young people there. We need to create youth leaders, not for the future, but for now in Africa. And so I've just that resonates so well with me because, like I said, I've always been focused on trying to help people on that journey. And so, for example, when I was after that job in Connaught Hospital, I took on a job with Restless Development, which is a youth NGO based in the UK. But I was a country director for Sierra Leone, and I created a youth a sort of a leadership culture within that organization that helped the organization to really to grow and to stand on its 2 feet. But I think it's important. I think with the challenges that we're facing with contemporary societies, we've got so much. There's so much out there that is unforeseen. That's constantly changing. That's challenging. We've got so many different battles that you're fighting at the same time. You're juggling so many different plates as a leader. It makes no sense for you to try and take everything on yourself. It makes sense for you to create and delegate that leadership across your team.
And many people struggle with that, don't they? But Francis, lots of
Yes.
people might be watching this and thinking, oh, I know what he's saying. I need to do that, but I'm so pressed from here to there and I don't have time to develop people. I've got to deliver this. Sometimes I do things myself, or I'm not sure that this person can do that, or I'm not sure that they respect me, or all sorts of other particular things. How have you managed to achieve that? It sounds to me as though there's something that you need to really deeply, genuinely appreciate those people who you're working with, that you've got, and to be able to develop a very, very deep a meaningful connection. But that's what I get a sense of. Can you tell us a little bit? How does one actually do that? How
Nurture that.
did you develop that culture?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my mum. I think learning from my mum and how she kind of molded me to be the leader. My mum wasn't a very touchy, caring. She's a West African mother who would, her kind of approach to leadership is, at times to throw you in the deep end, but to give you armbands so you wouldn't drown. And that's how I look at that's how I work with my staff. I remember I'll give some very junior staff some very big tasks to do, but create an enabling environment for them to do that task, and to create a soft landing for them, so that once they are able to achieve that, then once they're able to see that they can do things that they never thought they could do, they grow as an individual. Because that's what happened to me. Like if we go back to what I said, I mean, I was told to be a leader. I didn't think I could do it, but from being thrown into that deep end and not drowning, I started to swim and started to grow as a leader. And so that's what I think I've tried to do with my staff, is to create opportunities for them to express themselves and to grow. But at the same time, you have to lead by example as well. I think, it's all well and good just giving people very difficult tasks. You have to show them that, one, you show them your vulnerabilities, show them that actually, yeah, I'm willing to take on this bold and scary thing. They want to see that in your lead. They want to see that in a leader, that you're not, you've got courage and you're strong and you've got resilience. They want to see that you're also vulnerable and that you don't always have the answers. But they want to be inspired by you persisting and trying your level best. And so, yeah, you've got to lead by example. But at the same time as well, you've got to, create a supportive environment, where you're not putting people down, you're not tearing shreds of people, where you're motivating, you're coaching, you're encouraging, you're picking people up, you're dusting them down, and you're telling them that they can do it, and those kind of three things of what I've tried to do, and I've learned from that in my leadership journey. I don't think I'm still learning. But if I look back to the old self, I've now learned that, it's really important to bring others on the journey with you.
It's very powerful what you're saying. I just wonder if you'll say one thing before we close. I want to just touch a little bit about compassion and being kind, and maybe it's a couple of things quite briefly, I think there's two things. One, that leadership journey. I love the things you're saying about supporting and developing people, and I love that thing about that from your mum's school of throwing people in the deep end, but with arms bands. Your that take on that leadership. It can take a big personal toll, though, isn't it? Because still, as the leader, there's a lot that rests on one's shoulders.
Yeah.
It can be incredibly challenging, and you've worked in really challenging environments. What would your advice be to a leader about how you balance that? Because then there's you and there's life and there's all these expectations, and it can be tough, right? I think, and sometimes other people may not know just how tough it is. And I think it's interesting you're talking about reading, for example, David Beckham's biography, because I think one of the things, I think there's a lot in common between leadership and in athletes, because often there's a price as well. There's a price in putting yourself forward. There's a price in challenging, or there's another way of doing things. There's a price in being. Could you tell us a little bit about how you've managed to? Yeah, I'd love to know just anything you want to say about that, because any tips you might share to leaders who are wanting to be authentic like you. They're wanting to make an impact. But knowing that it's not necessarily easy. Anything you want to say or share?
Yeah, I think leadership is alone. Like, you're absolutely right in all the things you've said. You summed it up very well. It's a very lonely journey, a journey that is, filled with some tremendous highs and some devastating lows. You're constantly oscillating between, amazing moments and terrifying moments at the same time, and it can, if you don't steer that ship, it can lead you into some very choppy and very difficult waters. But I think the thing is about, well, I think for me, what I've learned is not to get carried away not to get carried away about the successes, not to get carried away about the defeats, not to, if you set your sail you set your sail, you know your direction that you're heading. It doesn't matter whether you're going through a storm. It doesn't matter whether your boat is sinking. You're still, that boat is still heading in that same direction, and it will not stop heading in that direction. So it's really important to, one, set your sail. Going back to my childhood, it's important to be clear of your narrative. Don't let others, don't let the environment, like, determine your course and where you're heading. Don't let other people shape where you're going. Be clear that this is what I want to do. This is where we are going. This is how we're going to get there. And then you create that environment, you create that culture within your team, and saying, we're all working on this together. We're all heading in that direction. It doesn't matter what happens on the outside. But at the same time, going back to the thing, not getting too carried away. Don't be so carried away about your successes. Don't be so carried away about your losses. I think one of the things I've learned, going another sporting analogy, because I'm at my friend Bradley's house. He's my tennis coach. Tennis is another sport.
I love tennis. You know me. I love tennis and tennis analogies. Yeah.
Well, we probably heard that the Roger Federer quote when he said he's played, I think, 1,000 points, and he's only won 52% of those points, and he lost so many points. And tennis is about that. It's about dealing with the points that you lose.
And knowing the points that really important. That's what separates your Djokovic, your Federers, your Nadals, isn't it? They understand that.
No, it's about knowing the points that matter. And that's what I think about leadership. Right. You're gonna lose. People aren't gonna like you. You're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna have flaws. Yeah. But there's going to be those moments where you're going to make some absolutely transformational change, and you're going to drive that team forward than it's ever been. Right. And you're going to leave a legacy, and that's what it really matters. So all of those losses, they disappear. They don't matter as long as you can look back at what you've done and say, do you know what? I've taken you from A to B, and I'm happy with that.
I think that's really powerful what you're saying, Francis. I wonder if there's just one last thing you'll share
Yeah.
Because I think that's very powerful. You know, the things you talked about, setting your sail, being very clear, controlling your own narrative, creating that ecosystem, you know, embodying that leadership yourself. Really, that thing about supporting and developing others, throwing them in the deep end, giving them the bands, creating that environment of that ecosystem of leaders, and knowing that you're not going to win all the points. Not everyone's going to necessarily like you. And so on. And that lovely point that you link it back to, again, service and legacy and that
Yeah.
impact that you're actually making. Could you just say a word about, and you know, humor me in a way with, for me, compassion, as you know,
Yeah.
and really being kind and compassionate and being authentic is really important. Could you just tell us a little bit about what being a heart-centered, which I know that you are, and being a heart-centered leader, that's what Soul Leader's about. That's what all the people I invite here have in common, and albeit, as I've highlighted in a way, they're different ways. What does heart-centered leadership mean for you? What does the heart mean? What does that evoke for you? And you, it was funny, you were kind enough to talk about, you know, reading my old book, Soul Trader. I still need to write the Soul Leader book.
Yeah.
Maybe it will be written by the time people are watching this. But what does being heart-centered mean to you? And what role
Yeah.
has it played for you? Has it been part of that life raft or those you know, those floats?
Yeah, I think I mean, for me, two words spring to mind: empathy and care. I
Mm,
think that's what it all boils down to. If you look at what motivates me, what are those, you know, from all I've learned from this conversation today and also from my life in general, is about being empathizing with others, understanding the situation, the problems that they're going through, and caring enough to do something about it, not just sitting there and wanting. Going back to Africa and seeing all those things, it was about my ability to empathize and care. That's what got me on this journey in the first place, and that's what's keeping me on this journey.
mm,
You know, I think as a leader, you don't want to lose that. That's the if you lose, you can lose everything. But if you lose that, then you're no longer a leader. And I think if I for me, the ability to empathize with others and understand the situation they're going through and caring enough to do something about it, I think is what, for me, being a soul leader is all about.
wow. Well, you've said it all. I just want to say a big thank you. Thank you so much for that. I don't know how long that is. It may well be over my golden hour mark. But Francis, it's
Sorry.
been just a magical. It's been absolutely magical. I just want to say before we stop this recording, and for on behalf of people who might be watching it, I just want to say a big thank you for just sharing so richly and so generously
Thank you.
some very, very powerful insights from your leadership journey. And I certainly felt as though bits I was in part of that you know that ship with the sails that you were talking about traveling with you as you shared just some of these very, very powerful insights that I hope will be very much very nourishing for people who've been watching. So I just want to say a big, big thank you. All the best with your ongoing work. Perhaps I might invite you again to tell us more about that in the future. But just to say a very, very big thank you. Thanks for sharing so much of the journey.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.